All right, it is 10:30. Well, might as well get started here. Thanks everybody for joining us for the Contested Logistics panel. My name is Jared Serbu. I'm the deputy editor for Federal News Network. Thanks to the Navy League for letting me be a part of this. It's always fun. What we'll do over the course of the hour here is a bit of conversation between me and our panelists for the first half hour or so, but want to give as much time as possible for you all to get your questions into. So as we approach 11 o'clock or so, please just go ahead and line up at that microphone and we'll start getting to you as soon as I see people lining up. As far as just a little bit of intro about what we're up to here today, we might as well start with the National Defense Strategy, which, as I went through it a bit prepping for this, it's kind of littered with references to how important the overall topic of logistics is going to be to future fights. Just in the force design portion alone, it talks about effective logistics as an essential piece to 3 out of the 5 overall objectives there, having a military that's sustainable, survivable, and agile and responsive when you're dealing with a capable adversary in territory that you don't necessarily control. And we also heard General Berger talk about this just yesterday a little bit, in the context of his basic assumption that there's just no longer going to be 30 to 60 day windows to set the theater with logistics considerations, and things are just going to move much more quickly than folks have gotten used to. So all that to say, my sense as an observer is there's pretty broad recognition at the strategic and leadership levels that this is a challenge we really haven't had to think about in serious ways for quite a few decades, and we've got to deal with it. But then the really hard part is the how part, figuring out how all the pieces of the naval enterprise come together to plan for, and not just plan for, but eventually get to a place where you can have responsive logistics and reliable supply chains under these much more challenging circumstances that everyone thinks are lying ahead of us. We're lucky to have with us 3 of the folks who represent really important and different pieces of that enterprise. With me up here are Justin Wolf, the Chief Technology Officer at Systicon, who's going to give us some insights on what the industrial base needs to be an effective partner on all this. Also with us is Tracer Valentine, Deputy Director for Plans and Operations at Naval Supply Systems Command, and Robert Stukes, the Chief Logistician for the Program Executive Office for Integrated Warfare Systems. And we'll just go down the line here with some opening thoughts from each of our panelists. Justin, since you're immediately next to me, let me start with you, and let's talk about some of those industrial-based concerns. Obviously, industry's got to be a big part of this. Where do you see challenges and opportunities there for industry?
Yeah, so we're kind of in this unique position at Systicon, right, supporting a couple hundred different weapon systems, and kind of there's a common theme, whether it flies, floats, or rolls, in the complexity of these assets, right? There's not a Amazon Prime for logistics in these kinds of complex weapon systems. You don't just have the ability to produce a part or repair a part overnight. And as we've seen some of the great work that OPNAV and NAVSEA have done with endurance supply and understanding, how long with our COSALs and onboard spares we can last in the fight, the answers are not maybe what we would want, right, to support some sort of sustained effort abroad in a contested environment. And that requires, a pretty substantial capability boost or ramp up from the industrial base, right? We don't have the capacity, right? A common theme across these hundreds of programs that we help do modeling and simulation for is that the capacity doesn't exist, both in the production of new assets as well as the repair of those broken reparables, right? So something needs to happen. There needs to be a demand signal to ramp up that capability, right? I think that's a common theme that we see across the multitude of systems.
Tracer, let's hear from you next. I know you've been thinking a lot about the pieces of this that require advanced planning and exercising and pre-positioning. What does this look like from the Echelon 2 perspective?
Well, so just to give you a little bit of background and let you know where I'm coming from. So again, my name is Tracer Valentine, and I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee, home of the Grand Ole Opry. The bad news is I only performed there once. The good news is I'm not singing to you today. So from a perspective of the Edge 2 Commander Naval Supply Systems Command, one, we have a cadre of planners, and that's where my background comes from. So we are engaged not only from an NSS supply perspective or SNOP or any of these other acronyms, but we're engaged from the perspective of looking at the O plans, understanding what is the North Star for those O plans. going in and using the DMAIC process to break down what it is you need to measure and how you're going to be able, to analyze the data, because we are just drowning in data, okay? To be able to make those, I would say, weapon systems decisions. So I will talk today and make reference often to Admiral Fogo talking about how, if you want to know how to lose a war, okay, ignore the supply chain. And I would say ignore the calculus of contested logistics. So we're looking at that, and then, we determine exactly what it is we've got to measure, and then what levers we pull are going to have other effects, second and third order, to be able to support that O plan. That's kind of it in a nutshell at the unclassified level.
All right, also at the unclassified level, I'm sure. Robert, tell us what's going on with the PEO.
I'll introduce myself as well. Robert Sukes, PEO IWS, Chief of Logistics. So IWS, we have the portfolio of weapon systems in the surface Navy. We make, I always say we make ships into warships, right? We put all the whiz bangs on. And, we have our fellows, folks in PEO ships that have a kind of a whole different problem with industrial base. It's about welders, metal, like the raw materials, as well as sourcing some of those big commercial type electric plants and things like that. IWS, everything we build is very niche, very special, we're always trying to be like ahead of everyone, so cutting edge technology. One thing we've realized in our industrial base analysis and kind of analysis of supply chain is that we create the supply chain, a very unique niche supply chain. We're not just buying metal, we're buying gallium nitrate chips, and for integrated RF, and so we're always on the bleeding edge of these new things, and then we create kind of these sole source, single source, very specialized niches that it gets hard to grow capacity. I want to kind of, I was really more listening to them, wanted to chime in on a few things I heard, and I want to at least get my perspective was, we talked about kind of, I don't know if you guys said it exactly, but competing production and repair. So, in my office, we pretty much buy stuff, slap it on a ship, and it's the fleets. We do maintain life cycle support, so we're there. I mean, that's what DoD 5000 says we're supposed to do. But when it comes down to a programmatic decision of getting the next radar off the line to land it on a ship to meet all those schedules, avails, timing, and ultimately provide additional capability, throughput as well to the fleet, build a new radar or repair the old one. And so we're always in that battle because it's the same line, it's the same production and repair line, or at least it's the same specialized test equipment that we use to validate the repair or validate the production. So I thought that was something I wanted to point out with you all. In a unique position here, again, we lean heavily on our supply chain folks, NAVSUP, for us, WSS, the weapons system support. And again, we're starting now, just now, rebuilding that relationship, I think, with Tracer and other folks that I work with more directly at their, I guess you call that at ESH3, right? Your WSS folks.
ESH3s.
Yeah, so at the ESH3s, that we're building that tighter connection where when we talk about production contracts and repair contracts, how do we single up? How do we make that easier for industry to at least telegraph the punch and then actually understand what our priority is? Because a lot of times it's, well, I have a fixed price contract, I got to deliver on time and on schedule, so that's what you're getting. That repair stuff, not really my priority. And so just wanted to bring that up. I also wanted to kind of say, the way I got into this, I took this job about 2 years ago, and that was right when the Executive Order 14017 came out. I think I got that right. America's Supply Chain, that was the title. Talked about the defense industrial base. So there was kind of a frantic scramble. As soon as the president says something, everyone just kind of reacts. Let's go do supply chain stuff. And that's what people, that's what I have my admiral ask. Go do the supply chain thing. And, as an operations research analyst in the past, I'm used to that, where someone just says, go do that analyst thing, go figure it out. And so I've been we're kind of feeling our way through this whole supply chain industrial base. My primary use case for this industrial-based security piece is FOSI. If you're familiar with the CFIUS process, the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States, that's one of the things that I'm always looking at when I look at our supply chain is so clearly we buy American, right? I buy from Raytheon, I buy from Lockheed. I probably shouldn't have said names, but we buy from all the big companies that are down on the floor, right? Directly and indirectly. And none of them are trying to do anything wrong, right? They have certain requirements, Section 889 compliance with NDAA, to basically not buy buy from blacklisted companies. But what we found in our supply chain illumination analysis as we go deeper and deeper is those big companies, they buy from other big companies, they buy from slightly smaller companies, and eventually there's a bunch of Huawei chips in all of our stuff. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So I just wanted to say that that's one of the reasons we're trying to strengthen our partnership with NAVSUP so that there's no external intrusion into our supply chain from their side, and so kind of get our own government or house in order, and then partner with industry to kind of complete that circle to make sure that we, as we identify problems, it's not a, hey, you did the wrong thing. It's a, hey, did you know? Because of some of the decisions we've made in acquisition and production engineering phases. So.
Robert, you mind if I jump in?
Sure, go ahead.
So you made a couple of very good comments. One of the things we need to understand is aggregation matters. Well, why does aggregation matter? Is there's a fixed budget. You know, the Navy's part of the budget is approximately 30 to 33%, depending upon what year it is. And sometimes we get away from that, you know, spreading the peanut butter, and it's more for one service than another service. But we are competing for limited resources from a budget perspective, but we're also now competing for limited resources on the industrial side, that industrial network or that industrial base. On the other side, for upskilled labor that comes up from the small businesses. We're competing for the same resources to do shipbuilding, you know, new construction, to do ship alts, to do ship conversion, to do repair. And so these are very limited resources. And the days of just throwing money at it are gone, okay? What we have to do is we have to be innovative, and we have to come up with different ways to accelerate that supply chain, to accelerate the repair cycle, to accelerate, you know, procurement, okay? There was a discussion this morning about the whole, you know, you've got to procure first, okay? If you don't have that right, okay, you're not going to get to the end product. And I apologize for taking up the time, but you know, you hit some really good points there, sir.
I like what you said, though. One thing, just the last point is, we're going with what we got. Right. I think most of the sailors in the room understand what I mean by that. And so you're right. Making decisions, every decision we make now is what we're going to live with down the road. There's not really much time left to have, you know, we don't have buckets and buckets of spare parts and actually spare systems out there, especially when you talk about like Vice Admiral Kitchener, North Star 75. I mean, that's a North Star. I don't think we're getting there, but the point is we're going with what we got, so we got to make what we have count and available. So.
Right. And I think some of the challenges that you're talking about, you know, are applicable in the peacetime today, peacetime environment. When we look at the contested scenario, it obviously gets worse because of the increase in op tempo and everything else, but even from a depot capability standpoint, in a contested environment, you don't get to return those broken parts on a regular drumbeat. So you get this huge bow wave of components into the depot all at once, right? So you have this very lumpy demand instead of sort of that steady drumbeat that you would normally expect otherwise. So then you need even more capacity, right? Because you don't get that steady flow.
Yeah, for surge. I think, you know, it's something, I don't know, I won't attribute it to anyone, but something I've heard recently in our dealings with WASP, our kind of our planning effort around wartime acquisition and sustainment planning to support the Fleet O plans, like you said, is we buy a lot of material and we set it on the shelf, but we never actually turn that material into like operational material. Like I have material that NAVSUP can use today, but we're keeping it to do a modernization.
Right.
Now, the question is, how is that going to go? I mean, so when the balloon goes up, are we going to want to get more ships out, or are we going to want to repair the ships that are forward deployed? Like you said, and in a contested environment, I don't know, we haven't figured out that balance yet, or at least we don't have the break glass plan that we need to do that. And I think we need to do some analysis on how do we get the best bang for the buck across that.
And another concern that we've talked about before is that we're competing for the same resources when we get into that environment from the perspective of, we have people that work in the shipyards that have these, very high demand, very low density skill sets,
Yeah.
right? And now, oh, by the way, they happen to be reservists, okay? And they're going forward. And we're taking all of this battle damage and we're sending that back CONUS, okay? And so are we robbing from Peter to pay Paul?
We stole your whole panel.
No, I mean, I'll go sit down, it's fine with me. Maybe we can zoom out a little bit and orient people a little bit more to the broader challenge of contested
Yes,
logistics. And I guess, one thing that helps with that is, the Navy obviously already has very detailed classes of supply, so there's a rubric there already to think about how much of what and when you would need under what circumstances. And some of the stuff that you guys work with every day is a little hard to talk about in an unclassified setting, but there are things like fuel and food and toilet paper that are just going to be needed, no matter what. So maybe talk about that stuff as a proxy for the stuff that is harder to talk about. It's all going to face the same physics problems. How does it all get more complicated in a contested environment?
Look at where we've already been. Look at COVID-19. I mean, who wasn't challenged for paper products, masks, medical equipment, ventilators, et cetera. So I would say two things. One is we're already experiencing what I think we're going to experience in phase 1, phase 2 operations, and what people are still calling phase 0 right now. And I mean, it's affected everything from, rototillers to ships, okay? And then the transportation to be able, to move that. Robert, would you like to throw something in with that?
I think you were teasing me, so I was going to bring up Class 5 without going classified.
Right.
Class 5 material, ordnance, the bangs. The thing I want to say about Class 5 is forget about, what we need, what we got. We'll leave that for a different discussion at a different time. Ordnance is challenging in so many ways to move logistically. We have safety requirements, we have shock and vibe requirements, so we got to move it there. And it's also, even once you get it there, I mean, especially, I don't know who's been down on the floor, you saw a Standard Missile 6, or an SM-3 down there. Those get loaded into ships. I mean, that's a if your sea state is not 0, you're not doing it. So there's even external challenges that are outside our control, as well as equipment limitations, support equipment, cranes, just facilities that can hold that kind of material, because we have explosive weight capacities by building. So magazines, all these. So I point at Class 5 because it's. We had a recent tabletop exercise up at Carter Rock, and we wrote some unclassified ordnance truths. I should have brought them with me, but it's essentially Class 5 is a very unique material, and I think the key also that people need to understand is it's a consumable item, but it has a supply chain. It has a logistics tail. It's repairable, so it's a consumable, repairable, which is actually strange, right? It's not toilet paper. You don't just use it and it's gone. When you shoot it, it's gone, but it has a life cycle. We bring them in, we modernize them, we repair them, we have to recertify them. So how are we going to do that, or how are we going to quantify and accept risk in theater if we need munitions on station? So that's I think, one example of how complicated it's going to get in contested logistics environment.
It's a complex supply chain too.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm hoping most of the people in the audience already understand, but if you don't, is that the supply chain of World War II, I'll say through even post-Vietnam, is more of the same in regards to how we approach the production of munitions, how we repair ships, how we supply those ships, et cetera. And now, today, definitely from an industrial perspective, one is we don't set up a line to produce something and then leave that line up for the next 10 years. Okay, they can't afford to do that. And, well, I should say, there is one way that they can do that. If we get rid of the boom-bust economics of things like how we build ships, and then industry can say, all right, we can predict that for the next 24 months, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, we're going to see this volume, of ships. They might be slightly different, they might be, modernizations, et cetera. But we can now count on and predict what our workforce needs to be, what the skill sets have to be, et cetera. And can you expound on that from an industrial perspective?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think like a lot of the modeling and sim, that we've done, one, it's heartening to see the application of modeling and sim and tabletop exercises, which was traditionally like, and then logistics is there, right? Which was always traditionally what happened. And then we go back to war, right? And then, so now that we're actually thinking about this problem, we can understand what the capacity limitations are, what the capacity constraints are. And it goes back to, we have capacity constraints in supporting both NAVSEA and NAVAIR programs today in peacetime, more or less pilot training scenarios, right? Where we're not using these systems in a heavy operational environment. We're at about the best reliability of these systems that we can imagine. It's only going to get worse from here. And we don't have that repair capacity, right? Every modeling and SIM output is not what we want, right? If we're actually going to go use these systems operationally.
Yeah, and I think operationally we've done some we've taken some of these models that Justin's talking about and rejiggered them for wartime scenarios. Hey, you're not going to have the same repair capabilities and capacity. So what are your kind of your repair capes and limbs out when you're deployed? And so we've modeled that from like a battle damage assessment and repair perspective while we're out in theater. And it's a significant challenge to say the least, because we don't, we think of everything as I need an LRU, a part that I can align replaceable unit I can shove, and it's not the same. It's I need a whole system to replace that flaming hole in the side of my ship. And Tracer, I think you were there at one of our tabletops where we had some of the Fleet N4s in the room, and they were like, yeah, why is this so hard to repair? And we're like, well, it's really, really well integrated, so that when you're sitting in CIC, you have a complete battle picture. And they're like, well, can you make it less integrated so we can repair it easier? And I'm like, wait, your requirement was that it's a competing priority when you talk about design for tight integration and design for repairability. Those two things are counter, and so it changes our ConOps for deployed battle damage assessment and repair, for sure.
And it's extremely complicated.
Yeah.
When you start talking about platforms like the San Antonio, that as I'm sure many of you have seen in media reporting, how it has these huge wire bundles, and where they're located throughout the ship, and how battle damage, impacts that ship. So again, complication, matters. And then from an analysis perspective at NAVSUP, we have an entire group of folks within SUP-04, our assistant commander, and they're one and only, well, I shouldn't say they're one and only, but their purpose for being is to do the analysis in regards to supportability, okay, to do the analysis in regards to, also, well, who should we be partnering with? Who are we not partnering with? And then the great thing about that is, of course, WARP, WASP, NSS, partnering with industry, all of these various things. So I've been doing this business since 1978, okay? 40 years in uniform, 5 years now in August out of uniform. I am seeing more crosstalk across the system commands, across the combatant commanders, across the fleet than I've seen in my entire lifetime. And I see this all as goodness, because now instead of talking about what we're going to do, we're doing it, okay? And we're not going to come up and say, hey, brother, if you don't mind, can you study this for 2 years? We're coming up and saying, hey, you got 3 months. I need you to look at this thing. I need an answer. And by the way, I'm going to be checking with you every week, for how we're doing on progress. You have to tell me what additional resourcing you need, information you need, analysis that has to be done, and we're going to move out on it. Because there's something coming down the road in 2027 if we listen to what China's telling us. There's potentially something coming down the road if we look at what's going on in Eastern Europe. And we cannot afford to not be ready. Again, that's why logistics has to be looked at as a weapon system.
I wanted to build off of Justin's point about logistics recently getting more love in the modeling and sim world, because another obvious thing that's raised the profile of logistics in the public mind lately has been Russia's experience in Ukraine. Some of that, again, difficult to talk about in this setting, but I wonder let me back up a little bit, because from my perspective, it's difficult to tell how much of that bad experience has been due to incompetence/corruption, or whether it's just that this is a hard problem and they're having the same challenges that we might. So are we in a better place than they are? Have you learned specific lessons from the Ukraine experience other than logistics is really important?
Being innovative matters.
Yeah, I would say, Russia's going through a deindustrialization right now, right? Because they didn't do the kinds of planning that would be necessary to support the industrial base, to have an industrial base there to help. So, you can't just throw more systems. Eventually you run out of systems, right? You can have spare systems, but, that lasts for a while, but eventually you need to be able to actually do something with those systems. And I think what we've seen is, we know there's going to be budget challenges, right? So it really comes down to defensibility, right? Being able to understand what is the outcome for this next dollar that I'm investing in logistics, in a new system, in modernization. If you can bring that to bear and say, this is the mission effectiveness outcome of a decision that I'm making, that helps spread that $100 billion that's been allocated for readiness in an appropriate way, right? Because otherwise we're just playing darts, and that's the Russian approach that we've seen does not work well.
Without towing some kind of party line, I think, just to directly answer your question, I think we're in a way better position. Does that mean we're perfect or we're going to do amazing? No. I think there's always room for improvement. We're doing more analytics. I think what Justin said was really important is we've done enough analysis and analytics to have good requirements now. Now someone's got to fund them. So we do need to be able to just make that justification that, hey, if I want to buy, I'll use my example, if I want to buy an extra SPY-1 array, I know that's $100 million. I mean, is everyone okay with just spending $100 million to take an extra giant honking radar to put it in a warehouse somewhere just in case? Those are the trade-offs the very difficult trade-offs that the Pentagon has to make.
Risk analysis.
And it comes down to risk, right? Risk and acceptance. So, all those justifications need to be tight, and then there needs to be a balance made. But to answer your question, yeah, I think we've done. We don't accept as much risk. Maybe we accept more than I would like personally in logistics, but I think we accept a lot less than what, for example, Russia is.
Just trying to get a sense for how big that bill would be if it were funded. I mean, are those requirements mature? I'm not asking you for a number, but are those requirements mature enough that they're firmly into the PPBE cycle and they will make their way up to the hill in a way that can be justified?
That's a good question. I want to be careful. Yes, I think there's a lot of analysis, a lot of good analysis, and I wouldn't just call it a requirement. I would call it COAs, right? Courses of action, potential. And risk, right? It's you can't have everything. If we all had infinite money, we could have everything we want, right? But we don't have that, and it's got to be a balance. So, yes, I can just tell you historically those types of I'll just use the term battle spares initiatives end up on the bottom of a very long list where maybe only one or two things on the list is actually funded. So those are some of the challenges we fight.
Tracer, maybe talk a bit about, what's the sense of urgency toward this inside the Navy's planning cycles? I mean, it's nice to talk about a future of contested logistics, but if something bad happens in 7th Fleet tomorrow, you're probably already there. So how urgently are we treating this?
So, again, from my perspective, we've We've learned a lot of lessons from COVID-19. Okay, we've learned a lot of lessons from what's going on in the Donbass region in Ukraine, and as a result, we have a good feel for those phase two requirements, and again, and I hope I don't get myself in trouble here, but I don't think we're in phase 0. Okay, we're already there. Okay, we're getting challenged on a daily basis. Okay, whether it's cyber attacks, etc. So actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to read you something that I had written here.
Please.
So, from my perspective, we have been in a contested environment for years. We've been in a defensive position from a cyber perspective. We've experienced, and we're still experiencing, many of the supply chain disruptions during COVID-19 that I expect to see as, again, phase 1, phase 2 operations. So we're battling for resources, limited resources, to field a fleet that is ready, responsive, and capable of enduring that high-end fight. We're fighting for that skilled labor in the industrial base and access to the industrial base in some cases. We're already experiencing, area access denial. We're not in the Black Sea anymore, other than over the top of it. We also have experienced market denial during COVID-19, where countries started to look inward to take care of their own, vice being able to export. It wasn't about the almighty dollar anymore. And then environmental never goes away. So earthquakes, sandstorms, hurricanes, long duration intense heat that we're dealing with now, and the effects on the weapon systems, the freeze-thaw cycle in the Eastern European countries. If you don't believe that, try getting underway when it's minus 22 Celsius, in the Black Sea, and everything that's in the tanks, i.e. diesel fuel, is jellified. You're not getting underway. Combating strategic messaging, both local, regional, national, and on the global front. And then understanding the political realities of how they shape the battlefield. As an example, as we were talking about earlier, even though our government, military, and industrial base are attacked in the cyber domain literally on a daily basis, we are constrained and restrained in our ability to be able to take offensive action or retaliation. We've also been engaged as late as I believe it was the 23rd of March in Syria. We were attacked and we retaliated. So again, I don't think that's a phase 0 operation. And with that, I'll open the floor for if anybody has any additional comments.
I'll just go back to what I mentioned earlier from a kind of a supply chain risk analysis perspective. FOCI, the foreign ownership, control, and influence, is a real thing. I mean, we've, without getting into all the details, there's been, I think, hundreds now of denials of land procurements near military bases from other not so friendly nations trying to
China.
trying to invest, and so I mean, and it's not about necessarily, I'm not here to say China has bad intentions. They're a competitor. We'll just leave it at that. But but from our own, internal risk perspective, we have to accept or not accept certain levels of risk in certain areas. So both in the mission assurance and land procurement and things like that, 5G near bases. Obviously, we could talk about balloons too. I won't go there, but then there's the just straight up having ownership, control, or influence of a sector of the industrial base, especially as you get further and further down at like the raw material level. Fun fact was, when Ukraine when that war broke out, we did some analysis, found that Ukraine has an industrial waste byproduct. It's called helium, and they sell a lot of that helium to Taiwan, so that Taiwan can use it in its manufacturing process for microprocessors. I mean, so those are just these weird things you don't think about from a geopolitical and trade perspective that come into play, and so we just have to be. I kind of agree with you. In this age of globalization, I don't know that phase 0 really exists anymore.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And I know from an industrial perspective, industrial-based perspective, same challenges.
Absolutely.
Access to raw materials, you know, especially as we're talking about things such as, you know, the electrification of you name it, right? So those are rare earth metals.
Yeah. There
Okay,
you go.
and where do they come from? You know, what are the ethical, you know, my apologies. I am a heart attack, 2-stroke survivor, and sometimes the brain doesn't work really well. But we have some of those challenges.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's just so many things that we can talk about that are going to only become worse as we step into a contested environment. Right? We see the challenges today in peacetime scenario or phase 1 scenario, but if the balloon goes up, you know, it's only going to get worse and exponentially so. Right? So being prepared, being able to understand that risk and quantify that risk is really critical.
And part of that quantification includes, you have to understand, again, the environment and the impacts to the logistics, okay?
Right.
If you're operating helos in the desert, okay, those blades are going to last for a different amount of time. They're going to have different challenges compared to being used in the South Pacific, okay? They're operating in 2 different environments, and you've got to be ready to support those, you know, both of those environments. In the Indo-Pacific, everybody knows the challenge is the tyranny of distance, right? But then there's also the challenge of, you know, what happens if we have a 2-theater war, okay? And these, again, are going to impact, you know, logistics, both from the perspective of production, you know, consumption, and not only that, but you've got to get it there, okay? So we don't own, U.S. Transcom owns their budget, their responsibilities, you know, to be able to execute, right? But don't think that NAVSUP and NAVSEA and NAVAIR and the rest of them aren't concerned about how we're going to get that material in theater and what is the tail, what is the timeline to be able to execute that. Because if the fight's only going to last 14 days and you've got a 30-day cycle to be able to get material into theater, you missed the game. It's not that you're late to the game, you missed the game.
I want to make sure we're not neglecting our audience, but I've lost track of where the mic is. So if you are near a microphone and have a question, there we go. Sir, please.
Hi, I'm Ron Weinberger. I'm the Director of International Programs at the Naval Air Systems Command. And I hear a lot of panels and on a lot of different committees. I never hear international partners on here. And what I bring up is contested environment. I will say, I agree with everything you say, but I also disagree that we haven't been in a true country contested environment in 80 years. But we lived it during COVID, that we couldn't get off our own shores to deliver material. Or if we couldn't get to country C because country B would not allow flyovers. We also saw it during our engagement as OIF. We had European vendors not supplying required parts for our F-18s and others. So material is a big deal. Getting it to the facilities are a big deal. So let's just say during a contested environment, we're not getting items off our own shores.
And
Right.
you bring up some really good points. Another one that I would suggest adding to that, because we've experienced this on the food side of the house. Having food flowing into Europe, you know, to be able to support our troops, and then it gets there, because of COVID-19 or other things, there are now 3 additional inspections, okay? Oh, by the way, you know, we don't know who it is that has to sign the 3rd signature line. We'll have an answer in another 2 weeks. I mean, things as simple as that can have direct impact on the flow of a supply chain.
Correct. So kind of my point on all of this is we train with our international partners, we fight with our international partners, we even do cooperative programs where we do co-development, but when it comes to logistics, everything comes to a screeching halt. Whether it's maintenance, whatever it is. We've qualified foreign vendors and can't get them on contract because they don't qualify, low bid, all that issues that we go through, because we don't have set-asides for strategic purposes. We have set-asides for small business, you name it, but not for that piece. What I'm really saying is not a question, but more of a comment for everyone here, is our international partners in Indo-PACOM for NAVAIR, we have 18 like-minded nations who fly the same product, same system as we do, same material, we buy them from the same OEMs, yet we can't exchange parts. So what our group is doing now is we're identifying the barriers, who owns those barriers, and trying to get some of these guidances were developed 20 years ago, and people are still living off them.
A great get real, get better conversation to be had.
Correct. So we're working through that. I just really kind of just throw that out there as a free advertisement I'm taking advantage of. Think of our international partners, because if we can't get material there, we need to use them as our true partners in this fight. Thank you.
It's a really great point. Thanks for raising it, sir.
Yeah, and I'll also add that, we're remiss in not talking about it in our first half hour, but it is a constant conversation at WASP, at our working group level, at the ASN RDA level, and for us in NAVC, we're planning some cooperative tabletop exercises with some of those strategic partners in Indo-PACOM that share commonality with us, and there is a lot of red tape that can go away, and then there's also some that needs to stay when it comes to program protection and other aspects. So it's definitely a balance, and there's way too much bureaucracy right now. I agree.
Good morning, gentlemen. Somewhat similar question to the previous gentleman, but more on the military execution side. My name is Lieutenant Commander Anthony Chase. I'm the Executive Officer of Navy Cargo Handling Battalion 1, ESH-6 under ESH-4 Navy Expeditionary Combat Command. The Undersecretary Raven mentioned yesterday a 50% budget increase in munitions. Of the degree that you can, may you be so kind to expound on a future Allied strategy of rearming, refueling, and replenishing these ordnance munitions in a live maritime theater environment, i.e. crudes rearming at sea and/or austere environments, absent of fixed port facilities, non-traditional ports, or emerging SECNAV priority. Thank you.
So,
Yes.
I would say, not only great points to be made, but if you're living in that world, you know that we're already traveling down that road.
Yes, sir.
Okay, to develop that skill set. I apologize, I don't know if it's actually been fielded yet. I believe it has been tested, exercised, war gamed.
There have been multiple tests. I don't think we're at like an FOC capability, but we understand the requirement, especially with respect to, the exclusion zones and what we're going to need to do to get rearmed back and get ships back in the fight.
And we're, more, I'll say simpler kinetic munitions like, 120 millimeter and 155 howitzer rounds, right? I mean, we've more or less expended our production capability today, right, in providing ammunition to Ukraine, right? And so there is not the ability to produce at scale what we need, right? And that's just 155 rounds, never mind the smarter things that require integrated electronic circuits and, things that we already have challenges with in, Hellfire and other types of munitions. So, there are some challenges not only on the actual distribution and rearming, but just having something to rearm with, right, that we've got to explore further.
And that is where some of our international partners, are really making a difference in Ukraine right now. Okay, is they're able to take some of that pressure at least off of the U.S. supply chain for munitions.
And they have unused and available capacity, right, that we could use. So, yeah, no, that's a really good question, though. Sorry, I couldn't.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sir, please.
How you doing? Captain John Conrad, U.S. Merchant Marine, and I'm Run G Captain. These conversations often talk about airlift and warehouses and data systems, but the entire U.S. and Allied airlift capacity is less than the capacity of one modern Maersk container ship.
Yep.
Let that sink in. Warehouses are great, but in the Pacific, they aren't connected by roads or railroads. That leaves ships. General Miley said munition consumption rates in Ukraine are multiples higher than we expected. Munitions are heavy. We can't airlift them. That means ships. We need a minimum of 100 tankers. The AMP says the tanker security program gives me 10. So as a merchant marine tanker captain, what's going to happen? Most likely, the only thing I can see is I'm going to be sent out on a foreign ship with foreign crew. It might be Russian, might be Ukrainian, might be Indian, and I'm going to have to take command of that with 18 guys who don't speak English. I don't know what half this stuff is. I don't know what a spy radar or JDAC-2 or Hellfire system is. I go down to BAE Systems, I look at their radio set, it looks like alien technology just landed from Mars. So, speak to me, guys. What, contested logistics, like, I'm moving the ships, what's the advice for me and my fellow tanker captains with this explosive fuel of jet fuel and a foreign crew who hasn't been security vetted? Thank you.
So I would say that OpNav, Vice Admiral Williamson is absolutely engaged and taking the hard look at that. You know, we're engaged with our MSC counterparts. I don't know what the short-term answer is, so unfortunately I can't help you on that. Everyone is overtly aware of this issue, and mobility matters. Any Marines in here? Maneuver and fires, right? Okay, shoot and scoot, okay? That's gonna matter in the Indo-PACOM region, period. I don't care which island chain you're talking about, okay? So so here's another one. So what do you call hub and spoke for logistics? Anybody, any supply corps officers out there? You know the answer to that? If not, I'll give it to you. It's called a target. Okay? So maneuver warfare has not gone away, people, and it will absolutely impact, well, it absolutely impacted World War II, and it's absolutely going to impact World War VI. Okay? And again, I apologize, I don't have a good answer for you, sir.
I don't have a good one either. And the Marines General Berger has been sending Marines out to meet with ship captains, and I encourage everyone in the logistics to go to the Merchant Marine College, the Merchant Marine conferences, and talk about contested logistics there. The Coast Guard's there, the Marines are starting to get there.
Some of my best friends graduated from Kings Point, so and they're Merchant Marines. I think about this stuff too all the time. But I guess, you know, a bad answer that I can kind of give you is, and one of the big challenges we have is that what you're really talking about is a fleet O plan and a task force. So you would, you know, nominally, you know, these, your tankers, your supply ships will fall under the cog of the TICOM. Right, they have the job to man, train, and equip. Everything we're talking about from a SysCom perspective is how we support that O plan, ideally. So, but the big challenge we have at the SysCom level is, I guess I'll just say, lack of people with a need to know. Let's just put it at that. And so these O plans are at the, you know, the highest levels of classification. And so what good's a plan that no one knows that there's a plan? So for yourself, you would probably want to know that you're in the plan and you don't know. And that's a problem. So that's one thing. Admiral Dotson at NAVC, who's we just assigned a 1-star for wartime resiliency or warfighter readiness, I believe. And no, did I get it right? Close enough. But his mission is to start exposing those O plans to the people that truly do need to know, and that involves getting people clearances and other things as well. So, kind of a bad answer, but I think that is the answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, I'm Joe, and I'm a logistician.
Hi, Joe.
And I realize I've also been in Washington, D.C. for too long. Lots of good stuff you're talking about. And yeah, being in D.C., you get exposed to all the different things that we're working on. You even mentioned some of them. So endurance supply, ESOBS. Modeling is a wonderful concept. Modeling doesn't deliver stuff. So ESA-BEST, so what you're talking about here, by the way, is you're talking through, the peacetime, wartime, you're battling efficiency versus effectiveness and the competition. I'm going to throw in, and a Brit I heard talk about this, you have really a trilemma. It's the resilience piece as well. Because as long as you worry about efficiency, you're either not going to be effective, or if you're not investing in it, you're not going to be resilient either. Yeah, I know Admiral Dotson's working on battle repair stuff. OpNav's working on little things. By the way, when ESA-BEST goes into effect, what that effectively says is, I'm not going to have a combat logistics force, so Captain Conrad, so those cargo ships that MSC runs, I'm not going to have access to them. So I need all the parts I can get to support my Slick 32, my Spy 1. I need that on board now when I leave the dock. Need 90 days worth of that stuff because I'm not going to have access to the cargo. So if you're a fossil fuel guy, when do you get refueled? 90 days away? So things just don't match up for me. When you're saying, and I see a lot of people working on the periphery of little things, but altogether, they don't really address the real issues. So if you're talking contested logistics, it means you don't have access to stuff, and you need runtime to get ready for that access. Tell me about your industrial base. So, Robert, for that Spy 1 radar, when we have, even in peacetime, another Fitzgerald or a McCain, where are you going to get Spy 1 array from? What ship are you going to decommission to get to it? Because no, you don't have battle spares. And oh, by the way, even if you needed one, where's my representative from Lockheed in the room? Who's from Morristown, shipping the cornfield? What does your production line look like right now? Doesn't exist. And the mom and pop shops who've been working that 40-year technology are now retired and gone.
Joe forgot to mention that he's also a recovering supply officer.
So tell me, here, I'm going to make this one easier for you. Rather than try to give the DC line, because I know who y'all work for, and some of them are in the building today, I want you to be king for a day. What would you do, considering when we fought the last big war, we had a 3-year run-up. Industry mobilization occurred in 1938, not 1941. And by the way, Hondo Gertz, when he kicked off this thing called WASP, he used to call it his December 8th thing. So yeah, when the balloon goes up, what do you do on the next day? Well, guess what? Industry didn't get ready on December 8th, 1941. They were getting ready in 1938. So what are you doing? What do we need to do? You're king for a day. What would you do that we're not doing now that would make this work?
Joe, let me give a precursor to that. I hope you get a chance to come around and hear my chain disruption lecture.
Wouldn't miss it.
So really, I will say it was not 1938. Okay, it was actually started at World War I. And the reason I say that, so there were 30 shipyards just in the San Francisco Bay Area. Okay, and through the Emergency Shipbuilding Program, and I'm sorry I forget the name of the other program, I've got that in my notes somewhere, they produced over, in World War II, they produced over 6,000 vessels. Okay, that's a vessel a day. How did they do that? Well, there was already a core of skill sets, engineering, and management that cut their teeth, okay, in that San Francisco Bay Area during World War I. They learned a lot of those lessons, lessons learned, best business practices, et cetera. So we were lucky that when I'll say the pre-start gun went off in 1938, that we had some people on the industrial side of the house that already had those skill sets, were already in the industry, and were ready to start responding. And you're absolutely right. 3 years, 3 years spin up to be able to counter, in the Indo-Pacific.
I'm glad Tracer's here. I was just going to dive behind him.
Tracer didn't do the king thing. Robert, you're king for a day. What would you do
Well,
that you're not doing now?
You know where I work. I'm already the king. But no, for this stuff at least, I try to be. I think so. I'm an analyst. I'll back up and say that again, and we're prone to analysis paralysis, I'm sure. But I think there's a critical gap that we're missing today in the analysis field for supply chain management and industrial-based capacity. That's one thing that we don't know. I can tell you who builds what and how. We do not have any information on capacity. We get it, but it's always tied to like a part. Or a specific industry, and it needs to be at a requirements level. So I have a pretty cool project that I'm trying to get off the ground to look at kind of industrial capacity from like a specification level. Like those people build things that range between this much and this much, pick your spec, watts, volts, speed of steering or whatever. And so that, because what we're gonna have to do, to your point, to get ready now, we're not gonna be able to invest, I don't think as quickly as, 3 years ahead of time. So what I'd like to have is, essentially, what's the plan? What did we do in World War II? We told Ford, you're not making cars, you're making tanks. I wanna have that industrial base laid out, so when you say, hey, need SPY 1s, and everyone's like, well, we don't make SPY 1s, because that's all we're looking at is parts or systems. It's like, no, those people build RF, those people do glass work, we need glass work and to build TWTs. We'll put all that together in a kind of a broader analysis, so we really do have a break-glass plan of how we're gonna basically Title III people into our industrial base. So that's what we're missing, I think.
And I'm not going to attribute this to anyone because I don't remember the gentleman's name from yesterday, but he said he had done a study that said we had lost 47% of our industrial capacity across the board since 1969.
So what are you going to do to fix that, Hal? What does the king need to do?
Well, I absolutely agree, and I'll get into this later today, again, when I get into the next speech, is that we're going to do exactly what Robert's talking about. Because how did we win the war in World War II? Okay, it's exactly what Robert just said, is we went out and we said, you're making tanks, you're not making cars anymore. You're making planes, and I had a good example, and I think I'll be able to get that to you. A company that had nothing to do with making planes. They were a lumber company.
Yeah.
And,
making planes.
18 months into World War II, they were making planes, the gliders that actually ended up landing in D-Day. Okay, that's not a great answer. Okay, it's not a great answer. Why? Because what happens when I take away the industrial base capability to provide products to the population? Okay, they suffer. Okay, why did we win World War II? Because we invested. Our sons and daughters, our aunts and uncles, we invested our treasure, okay, as in like money, and we originally put ourselves ungodly into debt, okay, for the first responses. And I think you're going to see a lot of that same thing again. The big concern for me though, sir, is are we going to have time to do it? Okay? Look up something called, I think the Chinese call it the magic 2 weeks or the magic 14 days, and do some research and read that and see what their open source planning is. And it's basically to kill the logistics network. If they do that, they've won the day.
All right, let's try and squeeze one more in. It's going to have to be super quick, and unfortunately, this is going to have to be our last question. Please, sir.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Good question.
Super quick, John Klein from Johnson Controls. A lot of great pilot projects are going on with smart warehousing. Do you see that as the future, and will that be integrated into fleet operation data to better respond to battle damage and also send a signal to industry to increase production? Thank you.
You know, that is such an easy question. I'm surprised they let someone like
Yes.
you in here. I'm going to let my friend Robert answer that question.
I think that's a NAVSUB question. I know there is a
Smart warehouse in San Diego.
There is a forum here I saw on the agenda about 5G and smart warehouses. So I think, you know, to give a non-answer answer, yeah, I mean, that's the key. You know, I mentioned analysis paralysis, but I think it's also technology, just across the logistics kind of competency is really helping us move faster in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think so. I think smart warehouses will be effective. You know, I think the big challenge we have is right now there's material that's just sitting around that's not tagged at all.
Right.
And we're, you know, for those of you that are involved, I am, in the audit, you know, we keep finding more and more stuff. So I think you know, if we could be tighter with the way we manage our material, that optimization will definitely help us in the long term.
And I think it's like more broadly than just smart warehouses, it's speed,
Yeah.
right? So what is the configuration of our weapon systems? You know, what are the reliability of the components in those weapon systems, right? Where are our components that we have to provide as spares to our weapons, you know, and the faster that we can make that data available, whether that's Jupiter or some of the other, you know, functions that are being stood up from an logistics IT perspective to support that. Certainly smart warehouses is a piece of that as well that makes our ability to understand the reality today and therefore make a decision going forward is certainly going to help us be more effective.
And I'll even pile on like a digital threat aspect to that is, like you mentioned reliability, I think like remaining useful life is something we're coming up with. So imagine right now I know my population of what widgets in the fleet, I know all their individual remaining useful life. We start talking about, you know, Internet of Things and sensorization, and you know, imagine the production line fires up because the remaining useful life is below a certain level. We don't even have a failure yet, right? But we know we're going to need. So production ramps up, the warehouse starts to fill, the parts start to trickle out, and there's this kind of constant. I mean, everyone wants to do just-in-time. I mean, just-in-time logistics because it's cheapest. It's the most
That
efficient.
goes back to the
but-
efficiency versus
Right,
resilience
efficiency versus
discussion.
resiliency. So I think there's got to be a balance there, like Joe said. But I think enabling technologies can help us kind of sustain that just-in-time logistics network while still providing enhanced resiliency. So that's kind of how we're tackling that today. And
So-
it's certainly
oh,
one
sorry,
part.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
And so while I'm not, I know that this is in progress because I hear it briefed at the commander's update briefs, the morning update briefs, special topic briefs, et cetera, but I'm just not totally up to speed on it. But I will say that my wife, who works in the industry, and I won't name the company, but she works in the industry, and this is not coming, it's here. It's just how big is it going to get, and are they going to be able to meet the challenges from the cyber perspective?
All right, we are a few minutes over. That's going to have to be it. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thanks for your great questions, and please help me thank our panel.